I was never the sentimental type. Life, as I saw it, was a chessboard, and every relationship, every decision, was just a move. No emotion, no fluff, just strategy. When I married Rachel, it was calculated. She was everything a man like me needed: poised, sharp, and with enough charm to keep appearances intact. Together, we built what outsiders envied, a fortress of wealth, respect, and power. Until one morning it all shattered. The day started like any other. I drank my black coffee in silence while scrolling through emails. Rachel hummed a tune in the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. An anonymous tip had landed in my inbox late the night before. Its subject line read, "Check your queen." Attached was a single photograph: Rachel, her hair tousled, laughing with another man in what was unmistakably a dimly lit bar. His hand rested too comfortably on her thigh. I didn't react at first. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight, my breathing steady. Rage wasn't my style. I thrived in the cold calculation of revenge, and I knew better than to let my hand show. For Rachel, the game had just begun. I deleted the email and placed my phone face down. "You seem cheerful today," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter, watching her flip pancakes. She turned, flashing that practiced smile that had once charmed me. "Emily's school play is today, remember? We should leave by 6. She'll be upset if we're late." "Of course," I said, my tone even. I kissed her cheek, the gesture devoid of affection. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The wheels in my head began to spin. Rachel didn't know I knew. That was my advantage. I would bide my time, gather the evidence, and strike when she least expected it. By the time the play ended, I'd already started laying the groundwork. The smile I gave her that evening wasn't out of love, it was the calm before the storm. Rachel and the man in the photograph had made one fatal mistake: they'd underestimated the kind of man I was. This wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't even about love. For me, this was war. Over the next week, I became an expert actor. To Rachel, I was the same man she thought she knew: steady, unflinching, and entirely oblivious. But beneath the surface, I was methodical, ruthless, and hungry for answers. If she was cheating on me, I wouldn't confront her outright. No. That would be too simple. I wanted her to feel the walls close in, slowly but surely. The first move was gaining control of her secrets. I hired Marcus, a private investigator I'd worked with in the past. He wasn't cheap, but he was thorough. Marcus didn't ask questions about my motives. He simply nodded as I handed him the photograph and said, "I want everything. His name, his address, his schedule. And make sure she doesn't suspect a thing." "Understood," Marcus said, tucking the picture into his coat. "You'll have your answers in a week." While Marcus began his work, I played the dutiful husband. Every morning, I made Rachel her coffee just the way she liked it: 2 sugars, a splash of cream. Every evening, I complimented her on the little things: her dress, her perfume, the way she styled her hair. If she felt guilty, she didn't show it. Rachel was either a master of deception or completely unfazed by what she was doing. But cracks started to show in her facade. She began spending more time on her phone, her laughter too loud when she texted. She'd step outside to call her sister, or stay late at her office without a plausible explanation. I asked no questions, pretended to trust her, and watched her dig herself deeper into the hole. The weekend arrived, and Marcus called. "I've got something," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "The guy's name is Connor Webb. He's an architect. Mid-30s. Divorced. No kids." "Good," I replied. "What else?" "He's been meeting Rachel every Thursday night at a bar downtown called Harper's. Same table, same time. They're careful, but not careful enough. I've got photos and timestamps." A flicker of satisfaction warmed my otherwise cold demeanor. "And? He's renting an apartment across town. She's been there. Twice." The words hit me like a hammer, but I refused to let the pain show, even over the phone. "Text me the address," I said flatly. And keep following them. I want every move documented. That night, I sat in my office and reviewed the evidence Marcus sent me. The photos left no room for doubt. Rachel and Connor, leaning close, sharing a drink, laughing like teenagers in love. And then there was the final shot, Rachel entering Connor's apartment, her hand lingering on his arm. I clenched my jaw, my nails digging into the leather armrest of my chair. The betrayal was real, undeniable. But instead of letting the anger consume me, I funneled it into focus. By the time I walked out of that office, I had a plan. Rachel thought she was in control of her double life, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She underestimated me. Step 1 was simple: isolate her. Rachel thrived on control, on her ability to manipulate the narrative. If I could disrupt her sense of stability, she'd begin to unravel. And when she unraveled, I'd be there to catch every lie, every excuse, every pitiful attempt to save herself. But the real prize wasn't Rachel. It was Connor. He was the key to dismantling everything. The game had begun. By the time Marcus sent me the next batch of evidence, I was ready to escalate. The photos were sharper now, leaving no room for denial. Rachel's hand on Connor's arm. Connor leaning in close, his lips brushing her ear. They weren't even subtle anymore. The final image in the file hit the hardest: Rachel leaving Connor's apartment, her coat hastily thrown on, her hair slightly disheveled. It was the kind of detail that told a story without words. But I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to win. Late that night, while Rachel was asleep, I crept into her office. Her laptop sat on the desk, glowing faintly in the darkness. She never locked it. Trust was, ironically, her fatal flaw. I opened her email, and within minutes, I had access to everything. And then I found it, a string of messages between Rachel and Connor. Rachel, last night was amazing. I haven't felt this alive in years. Connor, same. You're incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Rachel, I'll come by again Thursday, but we have to be careful. He's starting to notice. Starting to notice? The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. Rachel had no idea how deep I'd already sunk my claws into her fragile illusion of control. But it wasn't enough. Words were damning, but I needed more, something concrete, something undeniable. The next morning, I placed a call to Marcus. I want access to Connor's apartment. There was a pause on the line. You're asking me to break in? Marcus asked, his tone cautious. No, I replied. I'm asking you to install a camera. Something discreet, something she'll never find. You're playing with fire, Marcus warned. Good, I said coldly. Let's see who gets burned. Marcus didn't ask any more questions. By that evening, he had the camera in place. It was tiny, embedded in a corner of Connor's living room, with a live feed I could access from my phone. All I had to do now was wait. Rachel left the house Thursday evening, wearing a dress I didn't recognize. It was black, sleek, and entirely unlike her usual style. Dinner with the girls, she said breezily, kissing me on the cheek before walking out the door. I watched her car disappear down the street, my expression blank. Dinner with the girls? Sure. When the notification from the camera app lit up my phone, I wasn't surprised. Rachel had arrived at Connor's apartment, laughing as he opened the door. The live feed showed them settling onto the couch, glasses of wine in hand. I muted the audio. I didn't need to hear their words. Watching was enough. Watching Rachel lean into him, watching his hands slide across her back. Watching her betray me in real time. But then something happened I didn't expect. Connor pulled back, his face serious. He said something, and Rachel stiffened. She looked uncertain, maybe even scared. I unmuted the feed just in time to catch his words. You said you'd leave him, Connor said, his voice low but firm. What's the hold-up? Rachel hesitated, biting her lip. I need more time. Ryan isn't stupid. If I rush this, he'll suspect something. He's already suspicious, Connor said. You're playing with fire. I smiled darkly at the irony. Rachel sighed, placing her hand on his. I'll figure it out. Just trust me. Trust her? The man was a fool. But this was better than I could have hoped. Rachel wasn't just cheating, she was planning her exit. She wanted out, but not on my terms. Good. Let her try. As they toasted with their wine glasses, I made my next move. I sent a text to Marcus. Find out everything about Connor's finances. Everything. If Rachel thought she was clever, she hadn't seen anything yet. By the time Rachel came home that night, her face was glowing, her steps light, her demeanor sickeningly sweet. She set her purse down by the door and walked over to me, planting a kiss on my cheek. Dinner was wonderful, she said, her voice dripping with casual cheer. We talked for hours. I looked up from my book, offering her a small, practiced smile. Glad you had fun. Inside, I was seething. I'd just spent the past hour watching her on my phone, draped over Connor like a lovesick teenager, spinning her web of lies. She was bold, I'd give her that. Emily asked for you, I added. Said you promised to read to her before bed. Rachel flinched, just a flicker, but I saw it. Oh, I lost track of time. I'll go now. She hurried upstairs, and I watched her go, my mind already churning with plans. Tonight wasn't the night to confront her. Not yet. I needed everything in place first. When Marcus called the next morning, I was ready. I ran his finances, Marcus said, jumping straight to the point. Connor's got debt. A lot of it. He's behind on his mortgage, maxed out 3 credit cards, and his business is barely holding on. If Rachel's planning a future with him, it's going to be one hell of a rude awakening. I smirked. Perfect. What about dirt? Anything I can use? Oh, there's dirt, Marcus said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. Connor's ex-wife filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity and emotional abuse. There's a police report, too, domestic disturbance, but no charges filed. And get this, he's been gambling. Casino receipts, online poker, the works. It was like Christmas had come early. Send me everything, I said. Within the hour, my inbox was full of ammunition. Connor wasn't just a bad decision, he was a ticking time bomb, and Rachel had tied herself to him willingly. But this wasn't just about exposing their affair. No, this was about dismantling their plans, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. That afternoon, I made an anonymous call to Connor's landlord. Using the information Marcus provided, I spun a tale of concern. A neighbor, worried about Connor's shady visitors and late-night comings and goings. I just thought you should know, I said. He's been having some unsavory people over. And I heard he's behind on rent? The landlord didn't need much convincing. That's putting it lightly, he grumbled. He's 2 months late already. I've been meaning to evict him. I hung up, satisfied. Connor's little safe haven wouldn't be safe for much longer. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with our financial advisor. Rachel had no idea how much control I had over our assets. Her idea of marriage was a joint bank account and shared credit cards, but I'd always kept the bigger accounts separate. I want her access frozen, I told the advisor. Savings, investments, everything. She can have her personal account, but nothing else. The advisor hesitated. Are you sure? That's a big step. I nodded. Do it. By the end of the day, Rachel would be locked out of every major account we shared. If she thought she could waltz off into the sunset with Connor, she'd find herself penniless instead. The final step was risky, but necessary. I crafted an email, attaching the photos and messages Marcus had gathered, along with a brief, damning summary of Rachel and Connor's affair. The recipients? Rachel's closest friends, her family, and, most satisfying of all, Connor's employer. I scheduled the email to send the next evening. Let them squirm, I thought, imagining the fallout. Rachel prided herself on her pristine image, her carefully curated circle of respectability. Watching that crumble would be almost as satisfying as watching Connor's life unravel. The next evening, Rachel walked into the living room as I sipped a glass of whiskey, waiting for the clock to strike 8 p.m., the exact moment the email would go out. "Hey," she said softly, sitting beside me. "I've been thinking maybe we should take a vacation. Just the two of us. Get back to what matters." I almost laughed. "A vacation?" She smiled nervously. "Yeah. We've been so busy lately. I feel like we've drifted apart." Drifted apart? The audacity. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. It was a notification from the email service, message sent. I set my glass down and stood. "You're right, Rachel. We have drifted apart. And I think it's time we fixed that." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "You'll see soon enough." My phone buzzed again, this time, a text from Marcus. "Marcus, it's done. Connor's landlord served him the eviction notice tonight. He's furious." I stared at Rachel, who was now looking at me with a mix of confusion and unease. She didn't know yet, but her world was about to collapse. Rachel's phone buzzed at first. One notification. Then another. By the time the third came in rapid succession, her face turned pale. She grabbed it from the table, glancing at the screen, and I watched her expression shift, confusion first, then disbelief, then panic. "Ryan," she started, her voice trembling. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the last sip of whiskey in my glass. "What's wrong, Rachel? You look like you've seen a ghost." She fumbled with her phone, scrolling through the messages that were now pouring in. Her friends, her sister, her colleagues. All asking the same thing: how could you? Some messages were longer, angry diatribes about betrayal, calling her a liar, a fraud. Others were short but devastating. "I thought you were better than this." She looked up at me, her face contorted with fear. "What did you do?" I stood, setting the glass down with a deliberate motion. "What did I do?" I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "No, Rachel. The question is, what did you do?" Her hands shook as she stared at me, her phone still lighting up with new messages. "I can explain," she stammered. "I bet you can." My voice was calm, almost too calm. "But I'm not interested in excuses, Rachel. Not anymore. You see, I know everything. I've known for weeks." The blood drained from her face. "Ryan, please. Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't insult me with more lies. I've seen the texts. The photos. The little rendezvous at Connor's apartment. Did you really think you were clever enough to get away with it?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It wasn't like that." "Don't you dare," I snapped, my voice ice cold. "Don't you dare stand there and try to spin this into something innocent. You betrayed me, Rachel. You betrayed Emily. You brought him into our lives, into my house. And for what? A thrill? A fling with a man who can't even pay his own rent." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "I was lonely. You were always so distant." "Oh, don't you dare blame this on me," I interrupted, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You think working late to provide for this family made me distant? You think sacrificing sleep, peace, and time with my daughter to make sure you had this perfect life was neglect? No, Rachel. This is all on you." Her tears fell freely now, but I felt no sympathy. Not anymore. Then her phone buzzed again, and this time, it wasn't one of her friends. It was a number she recognized all too well. She stared at it, dread filling her expression. "Answer it," I said, folding my arms. "Ryan. Answer it." With shaking hands, she picked up. "Hello?" Her voice wavered as she listened. I couldn't hear the words on the other end, but I didn't need to. Connor's tone was sharp, furious, and as the seconds passed, Rachel's face crumbled further. She tried to respond, her voice rising in panic, but he cut her off. "I've been evicted," she said quietly, after hanging up. Her voice was barely audible. I tilted my head, feigning surprise. Evicted? Well, isn't that a shame? Maybe he should have been more focused on paying his bills than stealing someone else's wife. Her eyes darted to me, wide with realization. You did this. I shrugged. Actions have consequences, Rachel. He played his part, just like you did. Did you think I'd let him walk away unscathed? That I'd let you walk away unscathed? She stood now, her anger finally surfacing. You had no right. No right? I laughed bitterly. You gave up your rights the moment you betrayed me. The moment you made this choice. She opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, smirking. Perfect timing. What now? She whispered. See for yourself, I said, tossing her a printout I'd prepared earlier. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the page. It was an email, sent to Connor's employer. Every detail of his sordid little affair laid out for them to see. Photos, timestamps, everything. Ryan, no. Oh, yes, I said, my voice laced with satisfaction. By now, Connor's boss has seen it. His colleagues have seen it. Do you think they'll keep him around after this? Do you think they'll trust a man who brings this level of chaos into his life? Tears streamed down her face as she sank back onto the couch. You've ruined him. No, I said coldly. He ruined himself. Just like you did. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel sat there, broken, defeated, while I loomed over her, a predator savoring the victory. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Pack a bag, I said after a long pause. She looked up at me, confused. What? You heard me, I said firmly. Pack a bag and get out. You can stay at a hotel, or with one of your friends, though good luck finding one who'll still talk to you after tonight. Her voice cracked as she spoke. What about Emily? She stays here, I said. Where she belongs. I'll tell her you're visiting family for a while. She doesn't need to know about this. Rachel's sobs filled the room, but I didn't waver. You brought this on yourself, I said, my voice void of pity. Now get out. She rose slowly, shoulders slumped, and walked upstairs to pack. As I listened to her footsteps, I felt nothing, no sadness, no remorse. Only cold satisfaction. I wasn't done yet. There was more to dismantle, more to destroy. Rachel thought the nightmare was over. But she had no idea what else I had in store. Rachel left that night. She didn't say goodbye to Emily. I heard the slam of the front door as she walked out with her suitcase, and I felt nothing. No anger, no relief, just the cold, empty resolve of a man executing a plan to perfection. I stood by the window and watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the dark, and then I turned back to the silence of the house. Emily asked about her the next morning. Where's Mom? She said, rubbing the sleep from her eyes as she shuffled into the kitchen. She's visiting family for a while, I said calmly, handing her a plate of pancakes. Just you and me for now, kiddo. She tilted her head, suspicious in that sharp way only children can be. Is she mad at you? I froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. No, sweetie, I said finally, forcing a smile. Sometimes grown-ups just need a little space. Emily didn't press further. She accepted my answer, but the weight of her unasked questions lingered in the room. Later that day, I received a call from Marcus. You're not going to believe this, he said, his voice tinged with grim amusement. Try me, I replied, leaning back in my chair. Connor showed up at Rachel's hotel last night. Marcus continued. He was furious, shouting in the lobby, demanding to see her. Apparently, he found out about the email to his boss. I smirked. And his boss fired him this morning, Marcus said. He's out. No job, no apartment, nothing. The guy's a wreck. Good. I didn't feel bad for Connor. If anything, I was just getting started. Keep following him, I said. I want to know what he does next. Rachel called that evening. I let it ring twice before picking up. "What is it?" I said flatly. "Ryan," she began, her voice thick with desperation. "Please, just listen to me. I don't have anywhere to go." "That's not my problem," I said coldly. "You've destroyed everything," she continued, her voice breaking. "Connor lost his job. He blames me. I made a mistake, okay? But you've taken this too far." I laughed bitterly. "Too far? Rachel, this is just the natural progression of your choices. You wanted him. You got him. But now you're learning that the grass isn't greener, is it?" Her sobs on the other end of the line didn't move me. "Ryan, please," she begged. "For Emily's sake, can't we just talk? Can't we try to fix this?" "No," I said sharply. "There's nothing to fix. You made your bed, Rachel. Now lie in it." I hung up before she could respond. 2 days later, Marcus sent me another update. Connor had packed what little he had left and left the city entirely. No forwarding address, no goodbyes. He'd vanish like smoke in the wind. Marcus's tone was satisfied as he delivered the news. "What about Rachel?" I asked. "She's been bouncing between hotels," Marcus said. "Spending what's left of her savings. Won't last long at this rate." "Good," I said simply. That night, I sat alone in the quiet house, nursing a glass of scotch. The pieces were falling into place, just as I'd planned. Rachel had been stripped of her lover, her reputation, and her comforts. Everything she'd taken for granted was crumbling, and I was the architect of her destruction. But as I stared into the amber liquid swirling in my glass, I felt an unease creeping in, something I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't regret, exactly, but a gnawing sense of emptiness. Revenge had been my singular focus for weeks, and now, with my victory within reach, it felt hollow. Emily came downstairs, her small footsteps breaking the silence. "Dad?" she said softly, standing in the doorway. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, setting the glass aside. "Are you okay?" she asked, her wide eyes filled with concern. I smiled faintly. "Of course, Em. Why wouldn't I be?" She hesitated, then walked over and climbed into my lap. "I miss Mom," she whispered. My chest tightened. "I know you do," I said gently, stroking her hair. "And I know this is hard. But everything I'm doing is for you, okay? To keep you safe." She nodded, resting her head against my chest. Her trust in me was unshakable, and it only strengthened my resolve. Rachel didn't deserve the life we built. But Emily did. As I sat there holding my daughter, I made a promise to myself. I'd finish what I started. For Emily. For our future. Whatever it took, I wouldn't stop until Rachel understood exactly what she'd thrown away. Rachel didn't call again for 3 days. I knew she wouldn't, not after the last conversation. She was too proud to beg a second time, but I could feel her desperation creeping closer. Marcus had sent me updates like clockwork, painting a picture of her slow decline. She'd moved to a cheaper motel on the outskirts of the city, no doubt realizing her dwindling funds wouldn't last long. Connor, meanwhile, was gone, truly gone. Marcus had tracked him to a bus station, where he'd purchased a one-way ticket to a town 3 states away. He'd left behind his car, his debts, and most importantly, Rachel. It was perfect. I spent the days following in careful contemplation, watching the pieces on the board shift into place. Rachel had nothing now. No friends, most had distanced themselves after the email. No partner, Connor had abandoned her as easily as he'd drawn her in. And no safety net, her access to my resources was severed, leaving her floundering in the wreckage of her choices. By the weekend, I was ready for the next move. That Saturday, as Emily and I walked through the park, her hand in mine, she stopped suddenly and looked up at me. "Dad, can we call Mom? Just to say hi?" The question stung more than I cared to admit. "Why do you want to call her?" I asked gently, crouching to meet her gaze. Emily shrugged. I miss her. And I don't want her to feel lonely." Her innocence was a dagger to the heart. Rachel didn't deserve Emily's kindness, her concern. But I wasn't about to let my anger spill over into my daughter's world. "I'll think about it, okay?" I said, ruffling her hair. "Let's get ice cream first." Her smile returned, and I felt a flicker of warmth. Emily was the only good thing to come out of all of this, and I'd do anything to protect her. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, my phone buzzed. It wasn't Rachel this time. It was Marcus. "Got something for you," he said, his tone clipped. "What is it?" "She's meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. Family law. She's probably trying to figure out her options for custody." The words sent a jolt of cold fury through me. Of course she was. Rachel had lost everything else, and now she thought she could fight me for Emily? "Where's the meeting?" I asked. Marcus gave me the address, and I hung up without another word. The next day, I waited outside the lawyer's office, sitting in my car with the engine idling. When Rachel emerged, her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, wearing a blazer that looked a size too big, I stepped out. She froze when she saw me. "Ryan," she said, clutching her purse tightly. "Planning something?" I asked, my voice calm but edged with steel. Her eyes darted around, as though searching for an escape. I was just getting advice. For Emily's sake. For Emily's sake," I repeated, taking a step closer. "Is that what you're calling it? You think you can just waltz back into her life and pretend none of this happened?" "I'm still her mother," she said, her voice trembling. "Are you?" I shot back. "Because no mother drags her daughter into her lies and schemes. No mother puts herself before her child like you did." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. "You can't take her away from me," she whispered. "You already did that to yourself," I said. "The courts will see the evidence, Rachel. The affair, the abandonment, the lies. You don't have a leg to stand on." She shook her head, her voice rising. "I made a mistake, Ryan. But that doesn't mean I don't love her." "Love?" I laughed bitterly. "You don't even know what that means." Her tears spilled over, but I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk. That evening, my lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. Rachel had no case. Even if she tried to fight for custody, the evidence of her actions would dismantle her credibility. It was almost over now. Almost. But as I sat in the quiet of my office, reviewing the documents one last time, a thought crept into my mind. I'd won. I had everything I wanted. So why did it feel like I'd lost something too? Emily poked her head into the room, her small voice breaking through my thoughts. "Dad, are you okay?" I smiled faintly. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Go get ready for bed." As she disappeared down the hall, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Rachel had taken everything from me. And yet, in some small corner of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd taken even more from her. The game was almost finished. But the cost was far greater than I'd expected. The knock at my door came late, almost midnight. I wasn't expecting anyone, which was why I instinctively reached for the baseball bat I kept near the coat rack before answering. When I opened the door, Rachel stood there, drenched from the rain and shivering. Her makeup was smeared, her hair plastered to her face. She looked like she'd been standing out there for hours, mustering the courage to knock. I said nothing, just stared at her, waiting for her to speak. "Ryan," she began, her voice hoarse. "Please. I need to talk to you." I leaned the bat against the wall and crossed my arms. "About what?" "Emily," she said. Can I come in? Just for a minute?" For a moment, I considered slamming the door in her face. It would have been easy, satisfying even. But something in her expression stopped me. It wasn't just desperation, it was a hollow kind of despair, the look of someone who'd run out of every option. "5 minutes," I said, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, like she was stepping onto thin ice, and stood just inside the doorway, dripping onto the floor. I didn't offer her a towel. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. She hesitated, wringing her hands. I've been thinking about everything, about what I've done. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I know I can't undo the damage I've caused. But I can't lose Emily. She's all I have left. I laughed bitterly. Now you're worried about losing her? You should have thought of that before you dragged her into this mess. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but I felt no sympathy. I know, she whispered, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to her. To you. But please, Ryan, don't shut me out of her life. She needs her mother. She needed her mother when you were sneaking around behind my back. I shot back. She needed her mother when you lied to her, when you told her to keep secrets from me. Don't act like this is about her. This is about you and your guilt. Rachel flinched, her tears spilling over. You're right, she said, her voice breaking. It is about my guilt. But it's also about her. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm begging you, don't take her away from me. The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment I saw the woman I used to love, the one who used to make Emily's lunches every morning, who stayed up late sewing her Halloween costumes, who cried the day Emily took her first steps. That version of Rachel felt like a lifetime ago, but some small part of me wondered if she still existed, buried beneath the wreckage. I don't know if I can trust you, I said finally. She nodded slowly, her shoulders sagging under the weight of my words. I understand, she said. But I'll do whatever it takes to prove I'm not the person you think I am. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. This isn't about what I think, Rachel. It's about what you've done. Trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. I know, she whispered. But I'm willing to try. I stared at her for a long time, weighing my options. Every instinct in me screamed to shut her out, to protect Emily from the risk of being hurt again. But Emily's voice echoed in my mind. I don't want her to feel lonely. Emily deserves better than this, I said, my voice low. She deserves better than both of us. Rachel blinked, her tears slowing as she absorbed my words. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise right now. She nodded, her lips trembling. Thank you, she whispered. I opened the door, and she walked out into the rain without another word. As I watched her go, a bitter taste settled in my mouth. Rachel was broken, that much was clear. But the question that haunted me was whether I was breaking too, and whether there'd be anything left of me by the time this was over. I locked the door and leaned against it, staring into the quiet darkness of the house. The game wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I wasn't sure if winning would feel like a victory. Rachel didn't contact me again after that night. Days passed, then a week, and her silence was louder than her pleas had been. Marcus kept sending me updates, though I stopped reading most of them. I already knew where she was, what she was doing, or rather, what little she could do with her life in ruins. Knowing more didn't change anything. I focused on Emily. She was my anchor, the only thing keeping me from slipping entirely into the void of my own anger and bitterness. Every morning, I made her breakfast and walked her to the bus stop. Every evening, we played board games or watched her favorite shows. I smiled for her, laughed for her, and buried every dark thought where she couldn't see it. But she could sense something wasn't right. Dad? She asked one night as we sat on the couch, her head resting against my arm. Is Mom coming back soon? The question was like a knife to the chest, and I hesitated for a moment too long. Why do you ask? I said carefully. I don't think she's happy, Emily said softly. She called me yesterday. She sounded sad. I stiffened. Rachel had called her? That hadn't been part of the agreement. What did she say? Emily shrugged. Just that she misses me. That she's sorry she's not here. I nodded slowly, forcing a neutral expression. And how did that make you feel? Emily was quiet for a moment, then said, I miss her too. But I'm glad I'm with you. Her words warmed me and broke me all at once. I kissed the top of her head. I'm glad you're here too, sweetheart. Always. Later that night, As I sat alone in my office, Rachel's voice echoed in my head, "She needs her mother." I hated that she might be right. No matter what Rachel had done, no matter how deeply she'd betrayed me, she was still Emily's mom. And Emily loved her in a way that was pure and untarnished, untainted by the bitterness I carried. It wasn't fair. But then, none of this was. I poured myself a drink, staring into the amber liquid as if it held the answers. How far was I willing to go to protect Emily? How much of myself was I willing to sacrifice in the name of justice, or revenge? The next morning, I made a decision. I called Rachel. She picked up on the second ring, her voice hesitant. "Ryan? I'm not doing this for you," I said immediately, cutting off whatever she was about to say. "I'm doing this for Emily." Her silence spoke volumes. "She misses you," I continued, my voice cold but even. "She doesn't understand what's happened, and I won't let her carry the weight of your mistakes. So here's what we're going to do." I laid out the terms. Supervised visits at first, short, infrequent, and on my terms. No overnights. No taking Emily anywhere without my permission. And if she even thought about pulling something, I'd shut it down immediately. "Do you understand?" I asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you, Ryan." "Don't thank me," I said sharply. "Thank Emily. She's the only reason you're getting this chance." I hung up without waiting for a response. The first visit was awkward. Rachel arrived at the house dressed in the same blazer she'd worn to the lawyer's office, and I wondered if it was the only professional-looking thing she had left. She looked thinner, her face drawn, but her eyes lit up the moment Emily ran to her. "Mom!" Emily cried, throwing her arms around her. Rachel clung to her like she was holding on to the last piece of her soul. "Oh, my sweet girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. I stood back, watching the scene unfold with a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. Emily's joy was genuine, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. But it didn't last. As the visit went on, Rachel kept glancing at me, her eyes pleading, searching for something I refused to give her. She tried to make small talk, to ask me how I was doing, but I shut it down every time. This wasn't about us. It was about Emily. When the visit ended, Rachel hugged Emily tightly and promised to see her again soon. As she walked to her car, she turned to me one last time. "Thank you," she said quietly. I didn't respond. I just watched her drive away, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't name. That night, Emily fell asleep with a smile on her face. For the first time in weeks, she seemed at peace. And as I sat beside her bed, watching her breathe, I realized something that both comforted and terrified me. I wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for her future. And that meant I'd have to let go of the past, no matter how much it hurt. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur. Rachel visited Emily twice more, and each time, the guarded tension between us softened ever so slightly. She was careful, overly so, her every word and action seemingly designed to avoid provoking me. I could see the cracks in her armor, how fragile she'd become. I didn't pity her, not exactly, but I couldn't deny that I felt something close to it. She was no longer the confident, composed woman I'd married, nor the deceitful manipulator I'd exposed. Now she was just broken. Emily, on the other hand, was flourishing. The brightness in her eyes returned, her laughter filling the house in ways I hadn't realized I'd missed. She didn't ask about Rachel as much, but when she did, her questions carried an innocence that I couldn't bring myself to tarnish with my bitterness. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of us as a family, smiling on vacations, celebrating birthdays, building snowmen in the front yard. It felt like another lifetime, one I could barely recognize now. And yet, the memories still held a strange, quiet power. The next day, Rachel called me. Her voice was steadier than it had been in weeks, but there was still a hesitance to it, like she was bracing for another blow. "Ryan," she began. I wanted to say thank you. For letting me see Emily. I didn't respond, waiting for her to get to the point. I know I have no right to ask for anything, she continued, her words careful, deliberate. But I've been thinking about everything. About what I did. And I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly. I know that doesn't change anything, but I mean it. I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. When I lost you, she said, her voice cracking, I didn't just lose a husband. I lost the best part of myself. And I know I can never fix what I've broken. But I want to be better. For Emily. For myself. For the first time in a long time, her words didn't feel like manipulation or an attempt to salvage something that was already gone. They felt real. I'm not doing this for you, Rachel, I said finally. I'm doing this for her. I know, she whispered. And that's enough. She hung up, leaving me alone with my thoughts. A week later, I made a decision I hadn't thought I'd ever make. I called Rachel and asked her to meet me at a coffee shop near Emily's school. She arrived early, her hands clutching a steaming mug as she waited for me. When I walked in, she looked up, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. Thanks for meeting me, she said, her voice quiet. I sat across from her, folding my hands on the table. I've been thinking, I began. About Emily. About what's best for her. Rachel nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She loves you, I continued. And no matter how angry I am, I can't change that. I won't take that away from her. But if we're going to do this, if you're going to be in her life, we need to set some ground rules. Of course, she said quickly. Anything. I laid out the terms, my voice steady and firm. Supervised visits for now, gradually transitioning to unsupervised time if she proved herself. No contact with anyone like Connor, ever. And above all, honesty. If I caught her lying again, it would be over. Rachel agreed to everything without hesitation. Her desperation was palpable, but there was something else in her eyes too, gratitude. As we stood to leave, she hesitated, her gaze lingering on me. I know you'll never forgive me, she said softly. But I hope one day you can find peace. For both of us. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked out of the cafe and into the cold January air, my breath visible in the stillness. Rachel was right about one thing. I didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But as I walked home, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about Rachel. It was about Emily. She was my future. My hope. My reason to keep going. And no matter what, I'd make sure she grew up knowing she was loved. Even if it meant learning how to let go of my anger, piece by painful piece. That night, as Emily and I played a board game in the living room, her laughter echoing through the house, I realized something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.